The Sunday Times Rich List has been published this week. You'll have seen various headlines and you'll have seen all sorts of excuses. I'm going to give you some facts, and my question to you will be, we are told endlessly how we need the super rich. And when I talk about the super rich, I'm talking about people with hundreds of millions of pounds. I am not talking about people with incomes of 100 to 200,000 pounds who will be in the top 1% of earners. I am talking about a different level of wealth, the super rich. We are told we need them in this country. My question to you is, do we need them? Ring me 0345 6060 973. Right, let's get on to the data. Sunday Times Rich List. We now know that Rishi Sunak and his family's wealth, largely through his wife's shares in a company called Infosys, which her parents established, their wealth has increased by £122 million to over £650 million. They are now wealthier. Sunak is now wealthier than King Charles. That is, if you discount the King's palaces and so on and so forth. Now, the combined wealth of the people on the list is bigger than the entire gross domestic product, the entire GDP of Poland. We are talking about governmental wealth. That is, and these are just billionaires in this country. Now, they are richer than Croesus. Do you remember when people talk about, richer than Croesus, mentioned in a lot of literature, the legendary king of Lydia, who was supposedly at the time the richest man on earth? We're told it's marvellous. It's absolutely marvellous to have these super rich people. Aren't we lucky to have them in this country? Because apparently they provide money for us. And therefore, because they're here with all their money, we get richer too. You'd probably not be surprised to know that the facts say otherwise. The facts are that in the last 30 years, the wealth of billionaires alone, now Sunak is not a billionaire, he's almost a billionaire, but the wealth of billionaires alone in the UK has skyrocketed by over, have a guess, 1,000%. And it has unquestionably increased rapidly during the time of the Conservative government since 2010, when, of course, austerity was introduced. Since 2010 and the start of austerity, the number of billionaires in this country has quadrupled. Has your wealth quadrupled in that time, I ask you? Just in the COVID years, right? 2020 to 2022. So just in those years, billionaire wealth alone, not talking about all the people on that list, just the billionaire wealth in this country increased by almost £150 billion. Right? That's just in the COVID years. Nothing increases the wealth of the super rich like a pandemic or a national crisis. It's significant. And it's significant in this show because in the next hour, from 5 o'clock, we're going to be talking to the COVID excluded, the nearly 4 million people who suffered because they had absolutely no financial help from the government. Right, that's for the following hour. Now, some argue, they work so hard for their money. Well, that's not true because all the billionaires in the world under the age of 30 have inherited their wealth, often through trusts which are based offshore and are not, like you and I, subject, if you might be, to inheritance tax. It all goes offshore, it all goes in a trust, things are different for them. Now, much of that wealth goes through there. This week, the Deputy Foreign Minister, Andrew Mitchell, obviously a Conservative, he's deputy to David Cameron, he said in a speech that an estimated 40% of all the dirty money in the world, this is what the Foreign Minister said, all the dirty money in the world, 40%, nearly half of it, is laundered through the City of London And the UK Crown dependencies, they would be places like the British Virgin Islands. He said that. I'm going to repeat it. Nearly 40% of all the dirty money in the world is laundered through here and UK Crown dependencies. I'm not saying that. That's the Tory government saying that. So with all of these super rich, my question is, do we need them? Ring me 0345 6060 973, because now I'm going to tell you the flip side. Right. And this isn't a rant of envy by any stretch. I grew up in poverty. I was very lucky. I went to a lovely little school. It was a comp and I had some good teachers. I was on free school meals. And because the system helped kids like me then, I managed to get to Cambridge, got a degree, then went on. Then I hit lucky. I could buy a little house in Leeds. None of these things happen now to kids from poverty, kids with free school meals. Now, unless you are in dire straits and your parents are in dire straits, you don't get a full maintenance grant to go to university. All of that social mobility, it's all out of the window, absolutely out of the window. It shouldn't be. Anyway, David Cameron, since 2010, he made a speech where he said, we need austerity. We're going to introduce austerity because we need to save money, because the national debt of the country was somewhere around 770 billion back then. Right. I did my calculations. You know what I'm like with my numbers. And I did this back in, I think it was January or February, when we had 5,000 days of Conservative government. And I looked up on the Office of National Statistics, so I don't want anyone ringing in and questioning my numbers. And by then, the national debt was £2.7 trillion. So it had gone up by almost £2 trillion. You divide that effectively, I did it accurately, by the 5,000. And that equated to around, this is every day, the national debt had gone up for 5,000 days, every single day, by around £380 million a day under the Conservatives. On the flip side, the billionaires have quadrupled. Well done for them. Right. So on that calculation, I want to look at the Conservative government. Rishi Sunak and many cabinet ministers, including David Cameron, who obviously was involved with the Green Sill lobbying scandal, where he earned a reported £10 million or more. They've set up, so at least 10 cabinet ministers have set up what are called blind trusts. Now, this drives me nuts because it brings into question, are there conflicts of interest? We can't prove that there are in any way, shape or form, because what they put into the blind trust, the argument that they put forward is that we're putting all our assets into here and we're blind to what happens, but they know very well what's gone into the trust. So one thing is for sure, the blind trusts are blind to us. Now, Sunak, as we know, has been in trouble a number of times, most particularly when his wife held shares in a childcare agency called Coro Kids, which is one of 6 which the government put on their recommendations. She no longer has shares in that company since the stink that was created. He was hauled before the Standards Committee and, of course, nothing to see there. Now, I'm talking about this because you'll have heard on various stations, you'll have heard the discussion, we need the super rich. So if everything in this country, if we have had austerity in this country since 2010, if we have had that increase of almost 2 trillion, that's 2,000 billion pounds, has been added to the national debt, which is now at almost 100% of GDP. It wasn't when Gordon Brown was a Prime Minister. It was far from that. In all of that time, we have done that, and the billionaires, the rich, have got richer. They got richer in COVID years by 150 billion quid. So, do we need them? That's the question. Do we need the super rich? Or actually, the super rich, are they a bind on this country? And can we do without them?